Snow had buried Captain Alara Frost almost completely. For 18 endless hours, she never blinked, never shifted, never even dared to breathe deeply. Around her, an entire battlefield froze beneath a blizzard while thousands of soldiers waited for an order that never came. Across the valley, one enemy commander believed winter had already won the war. He never realized a silent woman hidden beneath the snow was watching every heartbeat through her scope. Then, at exactly dawn, Alara squeezed the trigger once. One bullet crossed the frozen valley, and before night returned, an entire war had changed forever. Winter arrived early that year, and it arrived with teeth. The pine forests along the Kaldheim range turned white within 3 days, and the wind carried a cold that cracked metal and split wood. Snow buried the roads. Snow buried the trenches. Snow buried the men who had marched into those mountains believing they understood cold. They did not. Temperatures dropped past -25 degrees, then past -30, and still the storms kept coming, layer after layer, until the entire valley looked like a single frozen breath waiting to be released. The special unit had pushed as far as the northern ridge before the enemy line stopped them cold. Every advance broke apart the same way. Artillery answered before the first boot touched open ground. Machine gun nests, hidden inside collapsed stone shelters, cut down entire squads in seconds. The valley below belonged to the enemy, and everyone on the ridge knew it. Scouts who tried to cross at night vanished. Reconnaissance drones failed in the storm. For 6 days, the offensive had not moved 1 single meter forward. Soldiers along that ridge had begun to lose faith in the mission itself, whispering among themselves that no force on earth could break a line held with such precision. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes faster than the enemy claimed lives, and morale sank lower with every failed attempt to push forward. Medics ran out of supplies twice that week, forcing difficult decisions about which wounded to treat first in tents barely warmer than the storm outside. Commanders higher up the chain demanded results neither Hale nor anyone under him could provide through conventional means. The valley had become a trap disguised as a battlefield, and everyone trapped inside it understood the difference perfectly well. Colonel Marcus Hale called the meeting inside a half-collapsed supply tent, lit by a single lamp swinging from a support beam. Maps covered the table, most of them useless now, since the terrain kept shifting under new snowfall. Officers stood shoulder to shoulder, faces raw from frostbite, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Hale did not waste words. He placed one photograph on the table and let it speak for him. A single man, thick coat, calm posture, standing at the center of the enemy command post. That man was the reason nothing worked. Remove him, and the entire enemy structure would fracture within hours. Communication lines ran through him. Orders ran through him. Morale ran through him. Keep him alive. And the valley would stay a graveyard for as long as the war lasted. Every officer in that tent understood the equation, and every officer in that tent understood something else too. No standard unit could reach him. The distance was too extreme. The terrain offered no cover. The cold alone would kill most soldiers within hours of exposure. There was only one name left on the list, and everyone in that tent already knew it before Hale said it aloud. Captain Alara Frost rarely spoke. She rarely socialized. She had a reputation that traveled faster than her footsteps, a soldier capable of staying still for hours at a time, capable of ignoring pain, cold, hunger, and fear in equal measure. Some called her unnatural. Others simply called her the only option. When Hale finally spoke her name, no one argued. Alara entered the tent without ceremony. She listened to the entire briefing without interrupting once. When Hale finished, he asked if she could do it. She looked at the photograph for a long moment, then looked up at him. She did not promise success. She did not offer confidence or comfort. She simply nodded once, turned, and walked out into the storm. Within minutes, the blizzard swallowed her whole, and no one in that camp saw her again for 3 days. Some among the officers doubted she would return at all, doubted any human being could survive the combination of distance, cold, and exposure the mission demanded. Others quietly admired what they had just witnessed, a soldier accepting an impossible task without seeking praise or reassurance in return. Hale watched the point where she had disappeared for longer than necessary, long after the storm had erased every trace of her footprints from the snow. He had sent soldiers into danger before, more times than he cared to count over the years. This time felt different, heavier somehow, though he could not fully explain why to anyone who asked. Alara left before sunrise, moving alone through terrain built to kill anyone who underestimated it. The first miles ran through dense pine forest, where snow had piled past her knees, and ice clung to every branch above her head. She kept her pace slow and deliberate, conserving strength she would need later, when the real danger began. Her pack carried only the essentials, since extra weight meant slower movement, and slower movement meant greater exposure to detection. She had left behind anything that might catch light, anything that might make sound against equipment or fabric while she moved. Every item she carried served a specific purpose, chosen carefully during planning sessions that stretched long into the previous night. Nothing about this mission allowed for improvisation once she stepped beyond the last friendly position on the ridge. Preparation, she had learned long ago, mattered more than courage when the margin for error shrank this thin. Every step risked exposing her to hidden sensors buried along the tree line, so she studied the ground before placing each boot, avoiding open patches where snow depth might reveal footprints from a distance. The temperature kept falling as the terrain climbed higher. By midday, her breath froze solid against the fabric covering her mouth, and her fingers ached inside thick gloves despite constant movement. She crossed frozen streams by testing the ice first with a long branch, refusing to trust silence beneath her boots. Enemy patrols used thermal scanners along key ridgelines, so she planned her route through natural cover, using rock formations and fallen trees to break her heat signature whenever possible. One mistake meant detection. Detection meant death. Noah Briggs supported her from a hidden observation point 3 ridges away, watching through a long-range scope of his own. Radio contacts stayed limited to exactly 3 transmissions for the entire mission, since any signal risked exposing her position to enemy listening posts. His first message came just after nightfall, a short confirmation that her projected route remained clear for another 2 kilometers. Alara acknowledged with a single click on her radio, nothing more. Words were a luxury she could not afford in that white silence. Night fell fast in the mountains, and with it came a cold that pressed against every exposed inch of skin. Alara stopped near a rocky outcrop and began digging into the snowbank, carving a narrow hollow just large enough for her body. She packed loose snow around the edges for insulation, then slid inside, sealing herself into a space barely wider than her shoulders. Inside that hollow, she became invisible to almost everything except direct inspection. She closed her eyes, though sleep never fully came, only a controlled stillness that kept her mind sharp while her body rested. By the following afternoon, she reached a position overlooking the enemy command post from a distance that would have seemed impossible to any conventional marksman. She confirmed Ivan Volkov's presence through her scope, watching him move between vehicles, speaking with officers, studying maps spread across a folding table. The angle, however, offered no clean line of fire. A ridge blocked half the compound, and wind patterns near that position shifted too unpredictably for a shot of that distance. She needed to move closer, and closer meant crossing ground with almost no cover at all. She spent the next hour studying the terrain ahead, memorizing patrol timing, counting steps between potential hiding spots, calculating exposure windows down to seconds. Every meter forward increased her risk of discovery exponentially, since the open slope offered nothing but scattered rocks and thin drifts of snow. Still, she moved, crawling low across frozen ground, using every shadow the fading light provided. Halfway across that exposed stretch, a patrol vehicle's searchlight swept across the slope without warning, sliding directly toward her position with no sign of slowing down. Alara froze completely, pressing her body flat against the snow as the beam crossed just meters from where she lay. For 3 long seconds, the light lingered on the slope, sweeping back and forth as though searching for something specific. Her heartbeat slowed by instinct, a trained response built over years of similar moments. Then the light moved on, sweeping toward another section of the ridge, and the vehicle continued its patrol route without stopping. She remained motionless a full minute longer before allowing herself to breathe normally again, fully aware that one more misstep like that could end everything before the mission even began. The vehicle's engine faded slowly into the storm, its taillights swallowed by falling snow within seconds. Alara counted 60 seconds before moving again, then another 60, refusing to trust silence alone as proof of safety. She crawled forward in short bursts, pausing after each movement to listen for any change in the wind, any distant shout, any sign that the patrol had circled back. Her muscles burned from the cold and the strain of moving low across uneven ground, yet she gave no outward sign of discomfort. Discipline had carried her through worse nights than this one, and she trusted it now more than she trusted her own exhaustion. By the time Ilara reached her final position, she had traveled farther than any planner back at camp had believed possible. The distance to the enemy command post now stretched beyond anything considered a reasonable sniper engagement, far past standard operational limits. There was no path back from this point without walking straight through open ground, fully exposed to patrols on every side. Retreat meant certain detection. Only forward progress, followed by absolute stillness, offered any chance of survival. She accepted that reality without hesitation and lowered herself onto the frozen ground. Somewhere behind her, 3 ridges back, Noah Briggs watched her final approach through his scope until the storm finally closed the gap between them completely, erasing her outline from view. He marked her last confirmed position on his map and passed nothing further over the radio, exactly as instructed. From that point forward, Ilara existed entirely on her own, cut off from support, cut off from confirmation, cut off from anything except the mission in front of her. She had trained for isolation like this her entire career, yet no amount of training ever made the silence feel ordinary. She built her final position with methodical patience, packing snow around her body until only the narrow barrel of her rifle remained visible, disguised beneath a thin layer of white fabric. The wind carried loose snow across her position naturally, completing the concealment better than any camouflage she could have applied herself. Once settled, she made a decision that defined everything that followed. She would not move again until the shot was taken, no matter how long that required, no matter what passed directly in front of her. The first hour crawled by in complete silence, broken only by wind sweeping across the ridge and distant engine sounds from vehicles moving through the valley below. Ilara controlled her breathing with practiced discipline, drawing air slowly through her nose, releasing it even slower, keeping her chest nearly still beneath layers of frozen fabric. Her pulse settled into a steady, unhurried rhythm despite the crushing cold surrounding her on every side. By the second hour, her legs had gone numb beneath her, though she refused to acknowledge the sensation, treating it as irrelevant information rather than a problem requiring attention. The 6th hour arrived, and with it came new snowfall, thick and relentless, burying her further beneath a white blanket that offered both protection and danger in equal measure. Snow accumulated across her shoulders, across her back, across the exposed section of her scope, forcing her to blink away flakes without shifting her head even slightly. Her fingers, wrapped around the rifle's grip, had lost most sensation hours earlier, yet she kept them positioned exactly where they needed to be for the shot she still had not taken. Somewhere beyond the 10th hour, cold stopped feeling like discomfort and started feeling like something closer to silence itself. By the 18th hour, ice had formed along the edges of her scope, forcing her to clear it with slow, careful breaths that would not disturb her position. Her body had crossed into a state most soldiers never experience and survive, a place where willpower alone kept vital functions running. An enemy patrol passed directly in front of her position sometime near the 15th hour, boots crunching through snow just meters from where she lay buried. One soldier walked a trained dog on a short leash, and the animal suddenly stopped, nose lifting toward the wind, ears alert toward her exact location. The dog stared directly at the snowbank concealing Ilara, growling low in its throat, clearly sensing something beneath the white surface. Its handler paused, glancing toward the same spot with growing suspicion, one hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. Ilara did not breathe. She did not blink. Every fiber of her training focused on becoming nothing more than another shape in a landscape made entirely of similar shapes. After several unbearable seconds, the handler tugged the leash and muttered something about the cold affecting the animal's senses, then continued walking, disappearing into the storm without looking back a second time. The dog glanced back once more before vanishing into the white haze, ears still low, as though unconvinced by its own handler's dismissal. Ilara listened to the fading crunch of boots and paws until only wind remained, filling the silence the patrol had left behind. Her heart rate, which had barely shifted even during those 10 seconds, settled fully back into its slow, controlled rhythm. She understood how close that moment had come to ending everything, yet she allowed herself no reaction beyond quiet acknowledgement. Fear, like cold, was simply another condition to endure without giving it power over her actions. Dawn arrived slowly across the Kaldheim Valley, the horizon shifting from black to deep gray, then finally to a pale, colorless light that spread across the snow like something exhaling after holding its breath too long. Ilara remained exactly where she had been for 18 hours, unmoving, buried, patient beyond anything reasonable. Somewhere in that valley, An entire war waited on the edge of a single decision neither side had made yet. She adjusted nothing. She simply watched, and she waited for one man to step into view. Her body had long since crossed into territory few soldiers ever returned from intact, joints locked from stillness, muscles trembling faintly beneath layers of frozen fabric whenever the cold pressed hardest against her. Yet her mind remained sharp, sharper perhaps than it had been at the start of the mission, honed by hours of forced focus with nothing else demanding her attention. She thought briefly of the men waiting on the ridge behind her, of Hale pacing inside his command tent, of Noah watching silently through his own scope 3 ridges away. None of that mattered now beyond the discipline it demanded of her. Only the bunker entrance mattered, and the man who would eventually walk through it. Ivan Volkov emerged from the command bunker just as morning light began cutting through the storm's final remnants, moving with the confidence of a man who believed the war had already tilted permanently in his favor. He had commanded that section of the front for 3 straight months, without losing meaningful ground, and every failed enemy assault only strengthened his certainty that winter itself fought on his side. He walked between armored vehicles, exchanging brief orders with subordinates, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. Nothing about his posture suggested caution. Nothing suggested fear. He believed the opposing forces had exhausted every option available to them. Ivan Volkov had built his reputation over years of careful, ruthless command, rising through the ranks by winning battles other officers considered unwinnable. He trusted numbers above all else, trusted the weight of armor and artillery over any notion of an enemy still capable of surprise. The storm, in his mind, had simply become another weapon working entirely in his favor, grinding down whatever resistance remained on that ridge, one frozen hour at a time. He had no reason to suspect that somewhere out in that same storm, a single soldier had already spent an entire night watching him through a scope, waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. Behind him, preparations for a full offensive continued at growing speed. Columns of tanks idled along the valley floor, engines rumbling low beneath layers of frost, awaiting the signal to advance. Artillery crews finished positioning heavy guns along elevated firing points, calculating angles meant to crush any remaining resistance along the ridge. Overhead, aircraft sat fueled and ready on a hidden airstrip several kilometers back, pilots waiting inside heated shelters for the order that would send them into the sky. Volkov intended to launch this assault within the hour, convinced it would finally break the standoff that had lasted far too long. Back on the ridge, Colonel Marcus Hale stood beside a radio operator inside a freezing command post, watching the valley through binoculars with growing tension pressing against his chest. He understood exactly what those enemy preparations meant. If Volkov launched that offensive before Alara completed her mission, the entire defensive line would collapse within hours, overwhelmed by armor and artillery no infantry position could withstand. Every soldier under his command depended entirely on a single shot from a woman buried somewhere in that white expanse. A shot that might never come if she had already frozen, or been discovered, or simply run out of time. The radio remained silent. It had remained silent for hours, exactly as planned, exactly as necessary for her survival. But silence, in that moment, offered no comfort at all. Hale had no way of knowing whether Alara still lived, whether the storm had claimed her before the enemy ever could, whether her position had been compromised sometime during the long night. He could only watch the valley, watch the enemy vehicles preparing to move, and trust a plan built entirely on the endurance of one soldier he had sent alone into conditions that killed men twice her size within hours. He thought back to the moment she had nodded and walked out into the storm, offering no promises, no reassurance, nothing beyond quiet acceptance of an impossible task. He had commanded soldiers for over 20 years, and few among them carried themselves the way Alara Frost did, without need for recognition, without need for conversation, driven by something quieter and far more durable than ambition. Whatever that quality was, Hale hoped it would be enough to keep her alive through a night that had already claimed lesser soldiers before her. He checked his watch again, though the numbers told him nothing useful anymore. Wind shifted across the ridge just as the enemy offensive began its final preparations, a subtle change Alara noticed instantly despite 18 hours of near-total stillness. She recalculated everything in her mind without moving a single visible muscle, running through variables she had rehearsed 1,000 times before this mission ever began. Distance remained fixed, locked into memory from hours of careful measurement taken before darkness fell. Humidity had shifted slightly with the fresh snowfall, altering air density in ways that would affect the bullet's path across such an extreme range. Temperature continued dropping, thickening the air just enough to matter at this distance. Wind speed became the final, critical variable, and it refused to cooperate easily. Gusts crossed the valley in irregular patterns, curling around rock formations before straightening briefly near the command post itself. Ilara tracked those patterns silently, counting seconds between calm intervals, waiting for the narrow window where wind speed and direction would align precisely with her calculations. Bullet drop across that distance required perfect timing, a fraction of a second either too early or too late, meaning the difference between success and complete failure. She had trained her entire career for exactly this kind of moment. Though nothing could fully prepare anyone for stakes this absolute. She waited exactly 3 seconds longer than instinct demanded, watching Volkov step fully clear of the bunker entrance, his posture relaxed, unaware that his life now existed inside a narrow, closing window measured in heartbeats. That single moment, framed perfectly within her scope, represented everything the mission had been built toward, everything 18 hours of frozen stillness had purchased at tremendous cost. Ilara exhaled slowly, releasing exactly half a breath, then held the remainder steady inside her chest. Her finger tightened against the trigger with controlled, deliberate pressure, refusing to rush even now. At the very edge of completion, the shot itself made almost no sound beyond the immediate area, swallowed instantly by wind and snow before it could travel far enough to alert anyone nearby. The bullet crossed the entire frozen valley in a fraction of a second, carried along a trajectory calculated across 18 hours of patient observation and split-second final adjustment. No one below noticed anything unusual in that first instant. No flash, no warning, nothing beyond the ordinary sounds of a camp preparing for battle. 3 seconds passed in complete silence. An eternity compressed into the space between cause and consequence. Then Ivan Volkov collapsed without warning, falling forward onto the frozen ground beside the bunker entrance he had just walked through. For several seconds, no one around him understood what had happened. Officers standing nearby froze in confusion, uncertain whether their commander had simply slipped on ice or suffered something far more serious. Then blood spread across the white snow beneath him, and the truth became impossible to ignore. Shouts erupted across the command post as soldiers scrambled toward their fallen leader, radios crackling with panicked, conflicting reports. The entire structure that had held that valley under enemy control for months collapsed in the space of a single breath, though it would take hours for anyone there to fully understand what had actually happened. Chaos spread through the enemy lines faster than any single command could contain it. Without Volkov, communication between units fractured almost immediately, since so many operational decisions had flowed directly through him alone. Contradictory orders reached different sections of the front within minutes, some commanders calling for immediate retreat, others insisting the offensive continue exactly as planned. Tank columns that had been idling, ready to advance, now sat motionless while officers argued over radio channels about who held authority to give the order. The precision that had defined enemy operations for months dissolved into confusion within the span of a single hour. Junior officers, unaccustomed to independent decision-making after months of relying entirely on Volkov's direct orders, hesitated at the exact moment speed mattered most. Some units advanced without support, exposing themselves to open ground for no strategic gain. Others withdrew entirely, abandoning defensible positions out of pure uncertainty rather than any tactical necessity. Communication between neighboring companies broke down as radio frequencies filled with overlapping, contradictory instructions. Each officer convinced his own judgment represented the correct path forward. What had once been a single, coordinated force now behaved like dozens of separate, uncertain fragments, each reacting to fear rather than strategy. Artillery crews, still awaiting clear targeting confirmation, began firing based on outdated coordinates, striking positions that had already shifted or been abandoned entirely. Several rounds landed dangerously close to their own forward units, forcing frantic corrections that further delayed any coordinated response. Aircraft crews, uncertain whether the offensive remained active, kept their planes grounded, waiting for confirmation that never arrived clearly enough to justify launching into contested airspace. What had been, only hours earlier, a confident and organized assault now resembled a structure collapsing from the inside, undone entirely by the loss of one man standing at its center. Colonel Marcus Hale watched the disorder unfold across the valley through his binoculars, recognizing the opportunity the instant it appeared before him. He gave the order immediately, sending every available unit forward while the enemy remained fractured and disorganized. Soldiers who had spent 6 days pinned down along that ridge finally advanced, moving through positions that offered no coordinated resistance for the first time in the entire campaign. Ground that had cost dozens of lives to attempt crossing during the previous week now opened up within hours, abandoned by an enemy no longer capable of mounting unified defense. Noah Briggs confirmed the kill through his own scope less than a minute after the shot, watching Volkov's body remain motionless on the snow while chaos spread around it. He radioed the confirmation immediately, breaking the long silence that had stretched across the entire mission. Two simple words traveled across the frequency, carrying more weight than any lengthy report could have delivered. Target down. Inside the command post, those two words spread instantly from officer to officer, met with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming relief after days of grinding, costly stalemate. Somewhere beneath the snow, Elara remained exactly where she had been, giving no sign that she had just changed the entire direction of the war. Inside the command post, Hale allowed himself a single breath of relief before immediately turning his attention back to the map, aware that relief without action would waste the opportunity Elara had just purchased at tremendous personal cost. He barked orders across the radio network, coordinating the advance with the same discipline that had kept his own units intact through 6 brutal days of failed assaults. Soldiers who had spent nearly a week pinned down, watching friends fall to artillery and machine gun fire, now surged forward with a ferocity born equally of hope and long-suppressed anger. The tide of the entire campaign had shifted in the space of 3 seconds, and every soldier on that ridge intended to make full use of it before the enemy could recover. Elara did not move from her position after the shot, understanding better than anyone the danger that followed a successful engagement at that distance. Enemy forces, despite their confusion, would inevitably attempt to locate the origin point of the fatal shot, sending search teams across the ridge in an effort to identify and eliminate whoever had ended their commander's life. She remained buried, motionless, watching through her scope as those search teams began fanning out across the valley within the hour, moving with methodical determination despite the surrounding chaos. Small groups moved along the ridge in careful formation, scanning the terrain with equipment designed to detect exactly the kind of concealed position she occupied. Elara tracked their movement without shifting her body even slightly, calculating which paths would bring them closest to her location and which would lead them safely past. One group passed within 30 meters of her hiding place, close enough that she could hear fragments of conversation carried on the wind between them. She resisted every instinct urging her to reposition, understanding that any movement risked revealing exactly what they were searching for. She made no attempt to fire on that search team, despite having clear opportunity to do so from her concealed position. Engaging them would confirm her exact location and invite far greater resources toward eliminating her before extraction became possible. Patience remained her only weapon now, the same patience that had carried her through 18 hours of stillness before the shot itself. She watched them move past her position, eventually continuing their search toward a different section of the ridge entirely, unaware of how close they had come to finding exactly what they sought. Hours passed in that same frozen stillness, though the character of the danger around her had shifted entirely since the shot. Where before she had waited for an opportunity, now she waited only for safety, for a moment when withdrawal might finally become possible without drawing attention. That moment never fully arrived. The storm thickened instead, burying the ridge under fresh snowfall that made any movement, even careful movement, far more dangerous than remaining still. She accepted this new reality the same way she had accepted every other demand the mission placed upon her, without complaint, without hesitation, simply adjusting her plan to match conditions she could not control. The blizzard intensified as the day continued, visibility dropping to near nothing across most of the valley, which worked entirely in her favor now that the shot had already been taken. Back at the command post, officers debated whether Elara could possibly have survived conditions that had already claimed several of their own soldiers to exposure during the previous days. Many assumed the worst, believing the extreme cold had likely killed her sometime during that impossible 18-hour wait, regardless of whether the shot itself had succeeded. Marcus Hale refused to accept that conclusion, though even he began to understand how slim the odds of her survival truly were as the storm worsened through the following hours. He organized a small recovery team anyway, refusing to abandon the search regardless of the odds officers around him quietly whispered about. Noah Briggs volunteered immediately, insisting on joining despite exhaustion of his own after days spent monitoring the ridge without proper rest. Hale approved the request without argument, recognizing in Briggs the same stubborn loyalty that had carried Elara through her mission in the first place. The team assembled quickly, gathering equipment suited for extended search efforts across terrain that had already claimed more soldiers than anyone cared to count that winter. They set out at first light, uncertain whether they searched for a survivor or simply for confirmation of a loss already assumed. 3 days passed before any search effort could safely reach the ridge where Alara had taken her position, delayed repeatedly by continued storms and the danger of enemy remnants still scattered across the valley. When a small recovery team finally moved out, few among them expected to find anything beyond confirmation of what most already assumed. Snow had reshaped the entire landscape during those 3 days, burying rocks, filling depressions, transforming the ridge into something nearly unrecognizable compared to the position described in mission reports. The team spread out carefully, searching an area that offered no obvious markers to guide them toward her exact location. They found what looked like nothing more than an unusual mound of snow, slightly raised compared to the surrounding terrain, easily mistaken for a natural drift formed by wind patterns. One soldier knelt beside it out of simple caution rather than genuine expectation, brushing away a thin layer of snow to check beneath the surface. Beneath his hand, something moved. A gloved finger twitched slightly, barely visible against the white background, but unmistakably alive. Shouts immediately called the rest of the team over, and within minutes, careful hands began clearing snow away from Alara's frozen, motionless body. She remained conscious, though barely, her body pushed to the absolute edge of what extreme cold allows a person to endure and survive. Her core temperature had dropped dangerously low, and frostbite had already begun affecting her extremities after 3 days buried beneath accumulating snow. Despite everything, her hands still gripped her rifle firmly, refusing to release it even as soldiers worked to lift her carefully from the position she had held for so long. Noah Briggs, part of the recovery team, broke down completely at the sight of her still breathing, tears freezing almost instantly against his face in the bitter cold. The entire team fell silent around her, offering a quiet, wordless respect for what she had endured and accomplished. Medics wrapped her carefully in insulated blankets before moving her onto a stretcher, warning the others against handling her too quickly, since rapid warming after such extreme exposure carried its own serious dangers. Alara said almost nothing during the journey back to camp, drifting in and out of consciousness as her body slowly began recovering from 3 days spent beyond the edge of survivable cold. When she did speak, her words were brief, focused entirely on confirming that the mission had succeeded rather than on her own condition. Even at her weakest, her priorities remained exactly where they had been from the very beginning. The war, not her own survival, occupied the center of her attention. The offensive that had seemed unstoppable only days earlier ended in complete failure for the enemy, its collapse traced directly back to the loss of a single commanding officer at exactly the wrong moment. Captured documents later confirmed exactly how close that battle had come to a very different outcome. Had Volkov survived even a few hours longer, his planned assault would have overwhelmed the ridge entirely, encircling thousands of soldiers with no viable route of retreat available to them. Analysts studying those documents afterward described the operation as one of the most decisive turning points along the entire northern front, a conclusion few had expected from a single, silent shot fired across an impossible distance. Enemy prisoners captured during the collapse described the days following Volkov's death as complete disorder, with units abandoning coordinated defense in favor of independent, often contradictory decisions. Several officers reportedly blamed one another for the failure, unable to agree on who bore responsibility once their commander disappeared from the equation entirely. Supply lines that had operated with ruthless efficiency under Volkov's direct oversight broke down within days, leaving forward units short on fuel, ammunition, and clear direction. What analysts later called the single most efficient enemy command structure along the entire northern front had proven, in the end, entirely dependent on one irreplaceable man. Remove him, and everything he had built collapsed almost as quickly as it had once seemed unshakable. Marcus Hale personally recommended Alara for the highest military honor available, insisting that her actions had directly prevented catastrophic losses across the entire campaign. Reports detailing her 18-hour wait circulated through command structures far beyond her immediate unit, drawing attention from officers who had never met her personally. Requests for interviews and public recognition followed almost immediately once news of the mission spread through official channels. Alara declined every single one of them without exception, showing no interest in public attention or ceremony surrounding what she had done. When pressed briefly by a senior officer regarding her achievement, she offered only one simple response before returning to her recovery. She had simply completed her assignment, nothing more, nothing less. She returned to duty as soon as doctors cleared her, refusing extended leave despite lingering effects from frostbite that would remain with her for years afterward. Colleagues noticed she spoke of the mission even less than she spoke of anything else, treating it as a closed chapter rather than an achievement to revisit. Occasionally, younger soldiers approached her, hoping to hear details firsthand, only to receive short, practical answers focused on technique rather than glory. She taught patience the same way she practiced it, through demonstration rather than explanation, letting her own discipline speak louder than any story ever could. Command eventually stopped requesting interviews altogether, recognizing that her silence had become as much a part of her identity as the mission itself. Years later, military academies began teaching that mission as a case study, though instructors quickly discovered that students remained far more fascinated by the 18 hours of stillness than by the technical details of the shot itself. Anyone could calculate wind speed and bullet drop given enough training and experience. Far fewer could remain motionless for 18 hours through extreme cold, ignoring pain, exhaustion, and fear without a single lapse in discipline. That distinction became the true lesson taught in classrooms long after the war itself had faded from daily conversation. Patience, instructors explained, had accomplished what raw firepower alone never could have managed. Simulations built around her mission tested students against similar conditions, though few managed to remain still even a fraction of the 18 hours she had endured. Most candidates broke within the first 2 hours, shifting position out of discomfort long before real danger ever demanded stillness from them. Instructors used those failures deliberately, illustrating just how extraordinary Ilara's endurance had truly been compared to ordinary human limits. Some students left those courses questioning whether such discipline could even be taught, or whether it required something innate, something no amount of training could fully replicate. The debate itself became part of the lesson, a reminder that legends often exist precisely because they resist easy explanation. A monument eventually rose near the Kaldheim Ridge where the mission had unfolded, a simple stone figure representing a soldier lying prone, facing toward the valley below. Local residents visited that monument each winter as snow gradually covered its surface, recreating almost exactly the same scene that had once concealed Ilara during those 18 hours. Few visitors knew every detail of what had actually happened on that ridge, though most understood the general story by then, passed down through soldiers, officers, and eventually ordinary residents living near the mountains. The monument required no elaborate explanation. Its silence spoke clearly enough on its own. Old veterans who had served in that campaign sometimes returned to the site during quieter years, standing before the stone figure for long stretches without speaking. Some left flowers despite the cold. Others simply stood in silence, remembering friends who had not survived the 6 days of failed assaults before Ilara's mission finally broke the standoff. Children born long after the war grew up, hearing fragments of the story from grandparents who had lived through that winter, though the details often blurred slightly with each retelling. What never faded, however, was the core of it, a single soldier who endured what seemed impossible, and a single shot that changed everything that followed. The mountains kept that story the way mountains keep most things, quietly, permanently, beneath layers that never fully disappear. War, in the end, is rarely decided by the largest army or the most advanced weaponry available to either side. Sometimes it comes down to a single person capable of remaining calm long enough to wait for exactly the right moment. Captain Ilara Frost proved that truth completely during Operation White Silence, when one bullet, fired after 18 hours of absolute stillness, changed the entire direction of a war within a single night. Her story endures, not because of the distance she covered, nor the precision of her aim, but because of the discipline she carried through conditions that would have broken almost anyone else. That endurance, more than anything else, became the legend the mountains still remember.